Elena didn't trip because she was clumsy. She tripped because someone grabbed her wrist. The tray tilted. Glass shattered. Gasps filled the room. And then she was sitting on a stranger's lap, warm, solid, immovable. Before she could scramble away, his hand slid to her waist. "Stay here a little," the man whispered. The room went silent. Because everyone knew who he was. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, turning Chicago into something that almost looked peaceful. Almost. Elena Cruz knew better than to trust appearances. She'd learned that lesson in Miami, then again in Houston, and finally here, where the cold bit through her second-hand coat and the wind off Lake Michigan felt like punishment. She moved through the kitchen of Costello's with practiced efficiency, balancing a tray of champagne flutes with the kind of precision that came from necessity, not talent. The restaurant had been closed to the public for the evening, a private event, they'd said. Which meant dangerous people with dangerous money, and Elena's job was to be invisible. She was very good at being invisible. "Table 6 needs refills," Marco hissed at her, his face red from the kitchen heat. "And for God's sake, don't make eye contact with anyone in the back room." Elena nodded. She never made eye contact. That was rule number 1. The main dining room glittered with crystal and candlelight, but it was the private room in the back that mattered tonight. Through the frosted glass doors, she could see shadows moving, men in expensive suits, the kind who never raised their voices because they didn't have to. She'd been in Chicago for 8 months. 8 months of keeping her head down, changing her hair color twice, using a different last name on her lease than on her work papers. 8 months of telling herself that maybe, finally, she'd run far enough. The champagne glasses caught the light as she pushed through the doors. That's when she saw him. He sat at the head of the table like he owned not just the room but the air itself. Dark hair, darker eyes, a face that could have been carved from marble if marble could look that cruel. Lorenzo De Luca. She'd never seen him before, but she knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. The man the city feared. The man even other criminals stepped aside for. She moved along the wall, refilling glasses, becoming part of the furniture. That's what she did. That's what kept her alive. But then she felt it. The prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Someone was watching her. Not the casual glance of a man wanting more wine, but the focused attention of a predator who'd spotted prey. She risked a glance to her left. The man standing near the window was tall, thin, with eyes like chips of ice. She'd seen him before. Not here. Not in Chicago. But somewhere. Her mind raced backward through cities and faces, through the catalog of people she'd been running from. Miami. The warehouse district. The night everything went wrong. Her hands started to shake. The champagne glasses clinked against each other, and she steadied the tray with both hands, backing toward the door. She needed to leave. Now. Before he recognized her. Before he remembered where he'd seen her face. But she was too late. His eyes widened with recognition, and he started moving toward her with purposeful strides. Elena turned, heading for the exit, but her path was blocked by another server carrying a massive platter of seafood. She pivoted left, trying to slip between tables. That's when fingers closed around her wrist like a vice. "Going somewhere?" The voice was cold, emotionless. Elena yanked her arm back instinctively, and the tray tilted. She watched in horror as champagne glasses slid, tumbled, shattered against the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and golden liquid. The sound cut through the low murmur of conversation like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned toward her. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on a fragment of broken glass, and suddenly she was falling. Her arms windmilled uselessly, reaching for anything to stop her momentum, but there was nothing but air and the terrible certainty that she was about to hit the floor hard. Then she wasn't falling anymore. She was sitting on something warm and solid. A lap. Someone's lap. Strong arms had caught her, steadied her, and now one hand rested against her lower back while the other settled at her waist. Elena's mind blanked with panic. She needed to move, to apologize, to disappear. She started to push herself up, but the arms around her tightened just slightly. "Stay here a little," a voice said, low and rough, spoken directly into her ear. The words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the absolute authority in that voice. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in velvet. She turned her head slightly and found herself looking directly into Lorenzo De Luca's eyes. Up close, they were even more dangerous. Dark brown, almost black, with flecks of amber that caught the candlelight. They studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like he could see every secret she'd ever kept, every lie she'd ever told. The room had gone completely silent. Even the clink of silverware had stopped. Elena could feel eyes on them from every direction. The man who'd grabbed her wrist had stepped back, his face carefully blank. The other men at the table sat frozen, watching their boss with expressions that ranged from shock to calculating interest. "I'm sorry," Elena managed to whisper. "I didn't mean to." "Who grabbed you?" Lorenzo's voice was still quiet, but now there was an edge to it that made her breath catch. "What?" "Your wrist. Someone grabbed your wrist." "Who was it?" Elena's mind raced. She couldn't point him out. If she did, she'd have to explain why he'd grabbed her, and that would mean revealing who she was, what she'd seen. Everything she'd been running from for the past year would come crashing down. I tripped. That's all. I'm clumsy. I'm so sorry, mister." She trailed off, pretending she didn't know his name. His eyes narrowed slightly, and she knew he didn't believe her. But he didn't push. Instead, his thumb traced a small circle against her waist, the gesture almost absent-minded, and Elena's breath hitched. "De Luca," he said. "Lorenzo De Luca." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you are?" "Elena." The moment her real name left her lips, she wanted to snatch it back. She'd been using the name Maria here in Chicago. But something about the way he looked at her, the way he waited for her answer, had made her forget to lie. "Elena," he repeated, and the way he said it made her name sound like something precious. "You're trembling." She was. She could feel the fine tremors running through her body, could feel how her hands shook where they rested against his chest. She tried to pull away again, but his arms held her in place. "I should go," she said. "I need to clean up the mess, and you're comfortable," he finished. "Stay." "Mr. De Luca, I really can't." "Lorenzo." His hand moved from her waist to her face, fingers gentle as they tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, possessive, and completely inappropriate for a man she'd just met. "And you can. Unless you'd prefer to tell me who scared you badly enough to make you run." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew she'd been running from something. Someone. The question was whether he'd let her go or whether he'd dig until he found every secret she'd buried. "Lorenzo." An older man at the table cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should. We're done here, Salvatore." Lorenzo didn't look away from Elena as he spoke. "The meeting is over. Everyone out." There was a moment of stunned silence, then the scraping of chairs. Men who'd come here for important business, for discussions worth millions of dollars, stood without argument and filed toward the door. The man who'd grabbed Elena's wrist, the one from Miami, moved with them, but not before shooting her a look that promised this wasn't over. Within 2 minutes, the private room was empty except for Elena and Lorenzo. The shattered crystal still sparkled on the floor around them. Somewhere in the main restaurant, she could hear Marco's frantic whispers, probably trying to figure out whether to intervene or hide. "Now," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping even lower. "Tell me the truth. Elena opened her mouth, but before she could form a response, the door burst open. A man in his 30s strode in, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair as Lorenzo but a face that was more openly expressive. His eyes swept the scene, Elena on Lorenzo's lap, the broken glass, the empty room, and his eyebrows shot up. "Well," he said, a grin tugging at his mouth. "This is interesting." "Out, Marco," Lorenzo said flatly. "I'm not kitchen Marco. I'm your brother Marco. And I'm not leaving until you explain why you just threw out half the Chicago families for a waitress." He walked closer, studying Elena with open curiosity. "A very pretty waitress, I'll grant you, but still. She was attacked." That wiped the grin off Marco's face. "Here? In our restaurant? Who?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Lorenzo's attention returned to Elena. The tall man with blonde hair. The one who was standing by the window. "You recognized him." It wasn't a question, and Elena realized there was no point in lying. "Not to this man. He saw too much." "Yes," she whispered. "From where?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you that." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, then did something that surprised her. He smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "You're brave," he said. "Foolish, but brave. That man is Dmitry Volkov. He works for the Kozlov family out of Miami. If he recognized you, if he had reason to grab you in my restaurant, then you're in more danger than you know." Elena's blood turned to ice. The Kozlov family. Of course. The warehouse she'd seen that night, the shipment she'd witnessed, the man she'd watched die, it had all been Kozlov business. "I need to go," she said, trying once more to stand. "I need to leave the city tonight. I need to." "You need to stay exactly where you are." Lorenzo's arms tightened around her again, and this time there was steel in his voice. "Because right now, sitting on my lap in front of half of Chicago's underworld, I just claimed you. Whether you wanted it or not, whether I planned it or not, everyone who is in this room now thinks you're mine. Under my protection. And if you run, if you disappear tonight, it will be seen as a slight. An insult. I don't understand." Marco snorted. "He means he just painted a target on your back. Every enemy he has will now see you as leverage. Every ally will expect him to protect you. You can't leave now without starting a war." Elena stared at Lorenzo in horror. "But I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress." "You stopped being just a waitress the moment you landed in my lap," Lorenzo said. He studied her face, seeming to read every emotion that flickered across it. "Tell me what you saw in Miami. Tell me why Dmitry Volkov would risk grabbing you in my territory." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to keep her secrets locked away where they'd been for the past year. But sitting there in his arms, with his dark eyes boring into hers and his brother watching with sharp intelligence, Elena made a calculation. These men were dangerous. But Dmitry Volkov and the Kozlov family? They were death itself. "I saw murder," she said quietly. "A year ago in Miami. I was working late at a diner near the warehouse district. The kind of place that stays open 24 hours because the tips from drunk truckers pay better than the lunch crowd. I was walking to my car when I heard shouting." She paused, the memory flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. The sound of raised voices. The crack of a gunshot. The way the body had crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. I hid behind a dumpster. There were 3 men. I couldn't see their faces well in the dark, but I heard their voices. They were arguing about a shipment. Drugs, I think, or maybe guns. One of them said they'd been skimming off the top, taking more than their agreed cut. And then... She swallowed hard. And then one of them shot the man in the middle. Just like that. No warning. Did they see you? Marco asked, his voice gentle now. I thought I got away clean. But a week later, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything, but they left a message on my mirror. In lipstick. It said, "We know you were there." So I ran. I've been running ever since. Lorenzo's hand moved to her chin, tilting her face up so she had to meet his eyes. And the man who died? Do you know who he was? I heard them say a name. Victor. Victor something. I don't remember the last name. The look that passed between Lorenzo and his brother was dark and complex. Victor Kozlov, Marco said slowly. Dmitri's cousin. The heir to the Kozlov Empire before he disappeared last year. They've been searching for answers ever since. And now they've found their witness, Lorenzo finished. His jaw tightened. You're not just in danger, Elena. You're the key to a power struggle that's been brewing in Miami for a year. If the Kozlovs can silence you, they can bury the truth about Victor's death. If their rivals can get you to talk, they can tear the family apart. Elena felt the walls closing in. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to forget what I saw and disappear. I know. Lorenzo's thumb brushed across her cheek, and the gentleness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the hardness in his voice when he continued. But disappearing isn't an option anymore. You have two choices now. You can run, and they'll hunt you down within a week. Or you can stay. Stay where? With me. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Elena didn't fully understand. She looked at this man, this stranger who held her like he had the right, who'd dismissed a room full of dangerous men without a second thought, who now offered her protection she hadn't asked for. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't know me. This isn't your problem. A ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips again. When someone attacks a woman in my restaurant, it becomes my problem. When that someone is Dmitry Volkov, acting without permission in my city, it becomes personal. And when that woman falls into my lap and every person with eyes sees me keep her there. He paused, his gaze intense. It becomes inevitable. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. The answer is that I don't let people take what's mine. And as of 20 minutes ago, fair or not, that's what you became. Elena should have been terrified. Should have fought against the possessiveness in his words, the assumption of ownership. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Relief. After a year of running, of looking over her shoulder, of sleeping with a knife under her pillow, someone was offering to stand between her and the monsters. Even if that someone was a monster himself. What would staying with you mean? She asked carefully. It means you move into my home tonight. It means you don't go anywhere without security. It means the city sees that you're under DeLuca protection, and anyone who touches you answers to me. He hesitated, then added, it means you trust me with your life. And what do you get out of it? This time his smile was sharper, with an edge of darkness that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. Information. You're going to tell me everything you remember about that night in Miami. Every detail, every word, every face you saw. Because Victor Kozlov's death matters. There are alliances built on the assumption that he simply disappeared. If he was murdered by his own family, that changes things. You want to use me, Elena said, but there was no accusation in her voice. Just understanding. Yes, Lorenzo said bluntly. I want to use you. But I'll also keep you alive, which is more than you can say for anyone else who knows your secret. So what's it going to be, Elena? Run and die, or stay and survive? She looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the intelligence in those dark eyes, the ruthlessness in the set of his jaw, the power that radiated from him like heat. He was dangerous. Possibly more dangerous than the people chasing her. But he was also here, solid and real, offering her the first genuine protection she'd had in a year. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Marco laughed outright at that, but Lorenzo's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. "Name them." "I'm not your prisoner. I can leave if I choose." "Agreed, though I'll try to convince you not to." "I don't. I'm not sleeping with you just because you're protecting me." Lorenzo's expression shifted, became unreadable. "I've never needed to leverage protection for sex, and I'm not starting now. When you come to my bed, if you come to my bed, it will be because you want to be there. Not because you owe me." The certainty in his voice, the assumption that she would eventually want him, should have annoyed her. Instead, it sent heat curling through her stomach. "And when this is over," she continued, "when the Kozlovs are dealt with or whatever you're planning happens, I get to walk away. Free and clear." For the first time, Lorenzo hesitated. His arms around her tightened almost imperceptibly, and something flickered in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. "If that's what you want," he finally said, "then yes." It felt like a lie. Or at least not the whole truth. But Elena was too tired, too scared, and too aware of the warmth of his body against hers to push further. "Then I'll stay," she whispered. Lorenzo's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip in a gesture that made her breath catch. "Good," he said softly. Then, to his brother, "Get Matteo. I want 6 men on her at all times. Full background check on everyone at Costello's. And find out where Dmitry Volkov is staying. I want to have a conversation with him." "Define conversation," Marco said, already pulling out his phone. "The kind where he understands that touching what's mine has consequences." Marco nodded and left, already barking orders into his phone. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Elena alone with Lorenzo in the destroyed private room. "You should probably let me up now," Elena said, though she didn't actually move. "Should I?" Lorenzo's hand slid from her face down to her neck, his fingers resting against her racing pulse. "Your heart is beating very fast. You're a terrifying man who just upended my entire life." "True." His lips curved. "But that's not why your heart is racing." He was right, and they both knew it. The fear was there, would probably always be there when she looked at him. But there was something else too. An awareness. An attraction that had sparked the moment she'd landed in his lap and had only grown stronger with every word exchanged. "This is a bad idea," she said. "Undoubtedly. You're going to use me to start a war with the Kozlovs." "Most likely." "I should run." "You won't." Lorenzo's other hand moved from her waist to her hip, the touch burning through the thin fabric of her uniform. "Because you're tired of running. Because you're tired of being afraid. And because part of you, the part that makes your pulse jump when I touch you, wants to see what happens next." Elena opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. God help her, he was absolutely right. Instead of answering, she asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Lorenzo said, finally releasing her and helping her stand, "we go home. You'll stay in the guest wing tonight, and tomorrow we'll start planning how to keep you alive and how to use what you know." He stood as well, and Elena was reminded of just how tall he was. How broad his shoulders were. How completely he dominated the space around him. Just like that? Just like that. He shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, more masculine. "Though I should warn you." "Warn me about what?" Lorenzo's eyes met hers, and there was heat there now, unmistakable and intense. "I meant what I said. About you coming to my bed because you want to." "But Elena?" He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I'm a patient man, but I'm also a man who takes what he wants." And I've decided I want you. Before she could respond, he was guiding her toward the door with a hand on her lower back. Possessive. Protective. Dangerous. As they stepped out into the main restaurant, Elena saw the staff pressed against the walls, watching with wide eyes. Marco was waiting by the entrance with 3 men in dark suits, bodyguards, Elena realized. Her new shadows. The cold Chicago air hit her face as they walked outside, but Lorenzo's jacket kept her warm. A black car waited at the curb, and Marco opened the door. "Welcome to the family, Elena," Marco said with a grin. "Try not to get my brother killed." Elena slid into the car, and Lorenzo followed, settling beside her with the ease of a man who owned everything he touched. As the car pulled away from Costello's, away from her old life and toward something unknown and terrifying, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the window. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed. She looked alive in a way she hadn't in months. Maybe years. And sitting next to her, Lorenzo watched her with an expression that promised dark things, complicated things, wonderful and terrible things. She'd fallen into the lap of Chicago's most dangerous man. And somehow, Elena suspected she might never want to get up. The drive to Lorenzo's home took them out of the restaurant district and into a neighborhood Elena had only seen in passing. Old money. Real power. The kind of place where mansions hid behind iron gates and security was invisible but absolute. The car passed through 2 checkpoints before pulling up to a house that was more like an estate. 3 stories of stone and glass, lit from within by warm light that somehow made it look welcoming rather than imposing. An illusion, Elena thought. Everything about Lorenzo was an illusion of civility over something far more dangerous. "This is your home?" she asked as Marco opened the door. "One of them," Lorenzo said. "I have apartments in New York and Miami, a villa in Italy. But this is where I actually live when I'm not traveling." He led her inside, and Elena tried not to gape. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, art that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hallway, her expression warm but professional. "Mr. De Luca. We weren't expecting you to bring a guest. Last-minute change of plans, Teresa. This is Elena. She'll be staying in the East Wing guest suite. Make sure she has everything she needs." Teresa's eyes flickered with surprise, but she nodded smoothly. "Of course. Miss Elena, if you'll follow me?" Elena glanced at Lorenzo, suddenly uncertain. He'd said she'd be in the guest wing, which should have been reassuring. Instead, she felt strangely reluctant to leave his presence. "Go," he said softly. "Get settled. We'll talk in the morning." Then, lower, for her ears only, "Sleep well, Elena. You're safe here." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that these walls would keep out the nightmares that had been chasing her. But as Teresa led her through hallways lined with expensive art and up a sweeping staircase, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just traded one kind of danger for another. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment had been. A bedroom with a king-size bed, a sitting area with a fireplace, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. French doors opened onto a balcony that overlooked gardens dusted with snow. "If you need anything at all," Teresa said, gesturing to a phone on the nightstand, "just dial 0. Someone is always available. Mr. De Luca has asked that you not leave the house without security, but you're free to move about as you wish." A prison with expensive furniture, Elena thought. But she smiled at Teresa and thanked her. When she was finally alone, Elena sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself shake. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright drained away, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. She'd fallen into Lorenzo De Luca's lap. She'd told him her secret. She'd agreed to stay in his home, under his protection, marked as his in front of the city's underworld. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, saw a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Sleep well, Elena. The suite next to yours is mine. If you need anything, anything at all." I'm 20 feet away. L. Elena stared at the message, her pulse jumping. He was that close. Just through the wall. She could probably hear him moving around if she listened carefully enough. She shouldn't have found that comforting. But she did. That night, for the first time in a year, Elena slept without nightmares. Morning came with winter sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close. Elena woke slowly, confused by the softness of the sheets, the warmth of the room, the absence of the usual knot of fear in her stomach. Then she remembered. She was in Lorenzo De Luca's home. Under his protection. Marked as his. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Come in," she called, expecting Teresa. Instead, Lorenzo entered carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. He was dressed more casually than last night, dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look even more dangerous. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd recently showered. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on the small table by the windows. "I thought you might be hungry." Elena pulled the blanket up to her chin, suddenly aware that she was wearing only the t-shirt and underwear she'd found in a drawer last night. Teresa had promised to bring her clothes today. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to." Lorenzo poured coffee into 2 cups with the ease of someone comfortable in his own space. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. He looked pleased. "Good. That's good." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Come. Have coffee. And then we need to talk." Elena hesitated, then grabbed a robe that had been left on the bathroom door and wrapped it around herself. She crossed to the table and sat, accepting the coffee he offered. It was perfect, exactly the right amount of cream, no sugar. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" she asked. "I asked Teresa to find out. She has her ways." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, watching her with those dark eyes. "Elena, last night I promised you protection. I meant it. But I need to know everything if I'm going to keep you safe. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded, sipping her coffee to buy herself time. "The night you saw Viktor Kozlov killed. You said there were 3 men. Can you describe them?" Elena closed her eyes, pulling up the memories she tried so hard to bury. One was tall and thin. Blonde hair. That was Dmitri, the one from last night. The second was shorter, stocky build, dark hair. He had a scar across his left cheek. And the third. She paused, struggling to remember. The third was medium height, well-dressed. I couldn't see his face well, but I remember his voice. Deep, with an accent. Russian, I think. The one with the scar, was he the shooter? No. It was the well-dressed one. He pulled out a gun so fast I barely saw it, and then Viktor was on the ground. Elena's hands shook, and she set down her coffee cup. They didn't even hesitate. Just shot him and started talking about how to dispose of the body. Lorenzo's expression was grim. And they were arguing about skimming from shipments? Yes. Viktor kept saying he had proof, that he was going to go to his father. And the other man, the shooter, said that's why he had to die. That Konstantin couldn't know. She looked up at Lorenzo. Who's Konstantin? Konstantin Kozlov. Viktor's father and the head of the Kozlov family. Lorenzo stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the snow-covered gardens. If Viktor was killed by his own organization for discovering theft, that means the rot goes deep. Probably all the way to Konstantin's inner circle. So what happens now? Lorenzo turned back to her, and there was something calculating in his eyes. Now we use what you know. The Kozlovs have been pushing into Chicago for months, trying to take territory that's been De Luca territory for decades. They think they can muscle in because they have numbers. But if we can prove that Victor was murdered by insiders, that there's corruption eating away at their organization. He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Then we can tear them apart from the inside. You want to start a war. I want to finish one they already started. Lorenzo came back to the table and crouched beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. Listen to me, Elena. The Kozlovs aren't going to stop. They know you're a loose end, and they don't leave loose ends alive. Your choice is to let me use what you know to strike first, or wait for them to find a way to get to you despite my protection. His hand covered hers on the armrest, warm and solid. I know I'm asking you to trust a man you barely know. I know this isn't the life you wanted. But you're here now, and we might as well make the best of it. Elena studied his face, trying to read past the charm and the intensity to the man beneath. And after? When the Kozlovs are dealt with? Then you're free. Like I promised. Would you really let me go? Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw something raw in his expression. If that's what you truly wanted, then yes. I keep my promises, Elena. All of them. Before she could respond, the door burst open and Marco strode in without knocking. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Dmitry Volkov didn't go back to Miami. He's still in Chicago, and he's been making calls. Meeting with people he shouldn't be meeting with. Lorenzo stood, his entire demeanor shifting from seductive to dangerous in a heartbeat. Who? Castellano's people. The Marchetti brothers. Even some of our own lower ranks. Marco's expression was dark. He's building something. Offering deals. Promising territory. He's trying to put together a coalition, Lorenzo said softly. Get enough of my enemies and allies with weak loyalties together, and they could move against us. Against you, Marco corrected. He's spreading rumors that you've gone soft. That you're distracted by a woman. That you're making decisions with your cock instead of your brain. Elena felt her face heat, but Lorenzo just laughed. It was a cold sound, lacking any real humor. Let them think I'm distracted. Let them think I'm weak. It will make it sweeter when I remind them why the De Luca family owns this city. He glanced at Elena. Get dressed. We're going out. Where? To send a message. An hour later, Elena found herself in the back of Lorenzo's car again, this time wearing clothes that actually fit. Teresa had produced an entire wardrobe seemingly out of thin air, designer jeans, cashmere sweaters, a coat that probably cost more than Elena used to make in a month. She felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Marco drove while two other cars followed behind, filled with men whose faces Elena didn't know but whose purpose was clear. Protection. Or maybe intimidation. With Lorenzo, the line seemed blurry. Where are we going? Elena asked. The Venetian Club, Lorenzo said. It's neutral territory. A place where the families meet to discuss business without bloodshed. And we're going there why? Lorenzo's hand found hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The gesture was becoming familiar, almost comforting. Because I'm going to introduce you properly. Make it clear that you're under my protection and that anyone who touches you will answer to me personally. Is that wise? Won't that just make me more of a target? You're already a target. This way, at least everyone knows the cost of coming after you. He must have felt her tension because he squeezed her hand gently. Trust me. The Venetian Club was exactly what Elena had expected, all dark wood and leather, cigar smoke and quiet conversations. Men in expensive suits occupied booths and tables, their bodyguards hovering nearby. The room fell silent when Lorenzo entered. He walked in like he owned the place, his hand on Elena's lower back, guiding her through the space with absolute confidence. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. and Elena felt every eye in the room lock onto her. "Gentlemen," Lorenzo announced, his voice carrying through the silence. "I'd like to introduce Elena Cruz. Some of you may have heard rumors about her. Let me make the truth very clear, she is under DeLuca protection. Anyone who threatens her, anyone who so much as looks at her the wrong way, will deal with me personally." The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Elena forced herself to breathe, to stand tall despite wanting to disappear. Then a man stood from a corner booth. Tall, blonde, ice-chip eyes. Dmitry Volkov. "Interesting," Dmitry said, his accent thick. "You make such declarations for a waitress? You risk your reputation, your territory, for a woman you've known less than a day?" Lorenzo smiled, and it was terrifying. "I risk nothing. I'm simply stating facts. Elena is mine. Anyone who touches her forfeits their life. And if she is wanted for crimes? If she witnessed things she should not have?" Dmitry took a step forward. "If she has information that belongs to my family? Then your family should have protected their secrets better." Lorenzo's voice dropped, became deadly quiet. "Let me be very clear, Dmitry. You grabbed her wrist in my restaurant. You scared her. You made her drop champagne in my private room. Those are 3 offenses against DeLuca hospitality. In the old days, I would take your hand for that. Be grateful I'm feeling generous." The tension in the room ratcheted up to unbearable levels. Elena could feel violence hovering in the air, waiting for someone to make the wrong move. "The Kozlov family does not forget," Dmitry said. "Neither do the DeLucas." Lorenzo's arm slid around Elena's waist, pulling her against his side. "Go back to Miami, Dmitry. Tell Konstantin that his son Victor sends his regards from the grave. Tell him that the secret he's been hiding is no longer secret. And tell him that if he wants to know more, he can come to Chicago and ask me himself." Dmitry's face went pale, then red with fury. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward what Elena assumed was a weapon. But before he could draw it, Marco was there, along with 3 other DeLuca men, their guns already out and pointed at Dmitry. "Don't," Marco said pleasantly. "We're in neutral territory. Wouldn't want to break the rules." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dmitry's hand dropped to his side, and he smiled a terrible smile. "This isn't over, DeLuca." "It never is," Lorenzo agreed. "But it will end. And when it does, I'll be standing, and your family will be dust." He turned, keeping Elena close to his side, and walked back toward the door. Every step felt like an eternity. Elena half expected to hear gunshots, feel bullets tear through her body. But they made it out into the cold Chicago air alive. Only when they were back in the car, doors locked and Marco driving fast, did Elena let herself breathe. "That was insane," she said. "You just declared war on the Kozlovs." "No," Lorenzo corrected, pulling her against his side despite her half-hearted protest. "I made them declare war on me. There's a difference. Now everyone knows that the Kozlovs are coming after DeLuca territory and then I'm standing my ground. When the shooting starts, I'll be the one defending my home, not the aggressor. That's a very fine distinction. Fine distinctions keep people alive in my world." Elena turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. "Are you sure you want to do this? It's not too late to send me away, to let the Kozlovs have what they want." Lorenzo's eyes snapped to hers, and there was something fierce in them. "I am never letting them have you. Never. Do you understand?" The intensity of his response sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "Why?" "I'm nobody. Just a waitress who saw something she shouldn't have." "You stopped being nobody the moment I decided you were mine," Lorenzo said. His hand cupped her face, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "I don't know why, Elena. I don't know what it is about you that makes me want to burn down anyone who threatens you. But I'm not fighting it anymore. So get used to being protected. Get used to being kept close. Get used to me." Before she could respond, his lips were on hers. The kiss was nothing like Elena expected. It wasn't gentle or coaxing. It was claiming, possessive, demanding. Lorenzo kissed her like he had every right to, like she belonged to him, like he was branding her with his touch. And Elena, God help her, kissed him back. Her hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him closer. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her into his lap as the car sped through Chicago streets. The world outside disappeared. There was only heat and want and the terrifying certainty that she was falling for a man who could destroy her as easily as protect her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't want you this much," he said roughly. "You're a complication I don't need. A distraction. A weakness. Then let me go." "I can't." His arms tightened around her. "I tried, Elena. All last night, I told myself to send you away in the morning. To give you money and a new identity and put you on a plane somewhere far from here. But I can't. The thought of you being anywhere I can't protect you, anywhere I can't see you, makes me want to tear the world apart." Elena knew she should be frightened. Should push him away and demand he keep his promise to let her leave. But instead, she found herself saying, "Then don't let me go." Lorenzo pulled back just enough to search her face. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. You're dangerous and possessive and probably a little crazy. But you're also the only person who's stood between me and death in a year. The only person who's made me feel safe. The only person who's made me feel anything other than afraid." She touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "So don't let me go, Lorenzo." "Not yet." The sound he made was half groan, half growl. Then he was kissing her again, harder this time, and Elena surrendered to it. To him. To whatever this dangerous thing between them was becoming. Marco cleared his throat from the front seat. "We're home. And you two might want to stop eating each other's faces before the entire staff sees." Lorenzo pulled back with a soft curse, but his eyes stayed locked on Elena. "This conversation isn't over." "No," she agreed, her lips feeling swollen and her body humming with want. "It's not." They entered the house separately, trying to maintain some semblance of propriety. But Elena could feel Lorenzo's eyes on her as she climbed the stairs to her room. Could feel the promise in his gaze that tonight, things would change between them. And for the first time since falling into his lap, Elena wanted that change. Wanted him. Even knowing how complicated and dangerous it would be. She was falling for the Mafia boss who'd claimed her with a whisper. And she no longer wanted to fight it. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur of normalcy and tension. Elena had lunch with Teresa, who treated her with warm kindness while asking seemingly innocent questions that Elena suspected were actually intelligence gathering for Lorenzo. She explored the mansion with one of Lorenzo's men, a quiet giant named Matteo, shadowing her every step. But all she could think about was the kiss in the car. The way Lorenzo had looked at her. The promise in his touch. Night fell early in Chicago winter, and Elena found herself standing on her balcony watching snow fall across the gardens when she heard the door to her room open. She didn't turn around. She knew who it was. "You'll freeze out here," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying across the space. "I like the cold. It reminds me I'm alive." She heard him cross the room, felt the heat of his body as he stepped behind her on the balcony. His arms came around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Are you alive, Elena?" he murmured into her hair. "Or are you still running?" "I don't know anymore." She leaned back into his warmth. "Everything's happened so fast. 2 days ago I was just a waitress trying to disappear. Now I'm in the middle of a war between crime families, living in a mansion, being claimed by a man who terrifies me. Do I terrify you? His lips brushed her temple. Or is it something else? Elena turned in his arms, forcing herself to meet his eyes. In the dim light from her room, they looked almost black. You terrify me, she admitted. But not the way you think. I'm not afraid you'll hurt me. I'm afraid of how much I want you to. Lorenzo's hands tightened on her waist. Elena. Tell me about Viktor Kozlov, she interrupted, needing to ground this in reality before she did something stupid. Why does his death matter so much to you? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed and pulled her back inside, closing the balcony doors against the cold. He guided her to the sitting area and settled onto the couch, pulling her down beside him. Victor and I knew each other, he finally said. Not well, but we'd met at various functions. He was smart, ambitious, wanted to modernize his family's operations. Make them more legitimate. And he was being blocked at every turn by the old guard. So when he disappeared, I assumed they'd killed him. But I couldn't prove it, and starting a war over an assumption isn't smart. So I waited. Lorenzo's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Then you fell into my lap with the proof I needed. The evidence that Viktor was killed by his own people. That the Kozlov family is rotting from the inside. And you can use that to destroy them. I can use that to free Chicago from their influence, yes. The Kozlovs are old school, brutal, unforgiving, willing to sacrifice anything for power. They deal in human trafficking, in drugs that kill children, in violence for its own sake. Lorenzo turned to face her fully. I'm not a good man, Elena. I've done terrible things. But I have lines I don't cross. The Kozlovs don't. So this is about protecting your city? It's about protecting what's mine. The city, yes. But also. He reached up, tucking hair behind her ear in that now familiar gesture. Also you. Because I meant what I said. You're mine now. And I protect what's mine. Elena knew she should argue with the possessiveness in his words. Should remind him that she wasn't property to be owned. But the truth was, part of her liked being his. Liked having someone strong enough to stand between her and the monsters. What happens next? She asked. Tomorrow, we meet with my information broker. Get him working on confirming everything you saw, building a case we can use. Then we reach out to some of Constantine's rivals in Miami, let them know what we know. Apply pressure until the organization fractures. And me? Where do I fit in all this? Lorenzo's expression softened. You stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle the dangerous parts. I don't need coddling. I know. But I'm going to coddle you anyway. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Elena's breath caught. Because the thought of you in danger makes me lose my mind. Because I can't focus on strategy when I'm imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Because what? Because in 2 days, you've become the most important piece on the board. And I can't afford to lose you. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Elena leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. This kiss was different from the one in the car. Slower. Deeper. A promise rather than a claiming. Lorenzo made a sound low in his throat and pulled her into his lap, one hand fisting in her hair while the other splayed across her lower back. Elena's world narrowed to just this, his taste, his touch, the solid strength of him beneath her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. If we do this, he said roughly, if we cross this line, there's no going back. Maybe I don't want to go back. Elena. I'm tired of running, Lorenzo. Tired of being afraid. tired of being alone. She cupped his face in her hands. You said I'd come to your bed when I wanted to. Well, I want to. Unless you've changed your mind? The laugh that escaped him was half desire, half disbelief. Changed my mind? Elena, I've thought about nothing but getting you into my bed since the moment you landed in my lap. But I need you to be sure. Because once I have you, I'm not letting go. I'm sure, she whispered. I'm terrified and probably making a huge mistake, but I'm sure. That was all the permission Lorenzo needed. He stood, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing, and carried her toward the door that connected her suite to his. His bedroom was larger than hers, dominated by a massive bed and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. He set her down carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. Last chance to run, he said. Instead of answering, Elena reached for the hem of her sweater and pulled it over her head. Lorenzo's eyes darkened as they traced over her. You're going to destroy me, he said softly. Then his hands were on her, and thought became impossible. Later, much later, Elena lay in Lorenzo's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she'd never felt so safe, so claimed, so utterly possessed. No regrets, he asked quietly. None. Elena tilted her head to look up at him. You? Only that I didn't claim you sooner. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Stay with me tonight. Don't go back to your room. I wasn't planning to. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and Elena felt herself drifting toward sleep when Lorenzo spoke again. I should tell you something, he said. About tomorrow's meeting. Elena forced her eyes open. What about it? My information broker is good, but he's also cautious. He won't give me what I need without insurance. He'll want to meet you, verify your story himself. That's fine. It means more people knowing who you are. What you saw. The more people who know, the more dangerous this becomes for you. Elena pushed herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. Are you trying to protect me or give me an out? Both. Neither. I don't know. Lorenzo's hand cupped her face. I want the Kozlovs destroyed. But not if it costs you your life. Then I guess we'll have to make sure it doesn't, Elena said. She kissed him softly. I'm in this now, Lorenzo. For better or worse. So let's finish it. The approval in his eyes made her stomach flip. You're stronger than I expected. I had to be. You don't survive a year on the run by being weak. No, he agreed. You don't. Which is why I should have realized sooner. Realized what? Lorenzo pulled her back down against his chest, his arms wrapping around her securely. That you falling into my lap wasn't an accident. It was fate giving me exactly what I needed. And what's that? Someone worth fighting for. Elena closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She'd spent a year running, afraid, alone. And then she'd fallen, literally fallen, into the arms of a man who terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring danger. War. Secrets dragged into the light. But tonight, wrapped in Lorenzo's arms, Elena finally felt like she'd found where she belonged. Even if that belonging came with a price written in blood and power and the dangerous love of a Mafia boss who'd claimed her with a whisper. She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat and the promise that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. And somewhere in Miami, Konstantin Kozlov received a phone call that would change everything. The war had begun.